Okay, all please do number 9.
Okay. So the question is, for whom will the court find? Okay. You want me to read the answers?
No, we don't have the subject.
Okay.
The topic, I mean the topic.
Topic. Okay, so I'll read like a third down.
2 days.
Yeah. 2 days after that sale, the original buyer told the seller that she had changed her mind and wanted to complete their contract. When the seller told her that he had sold the land to a third party, she sued him for breach of the written contract. For whom will the court find?
Now read A. Okay, now first you read that, and what is the topic are we under?
Real estate.
Real estate, breach of contract, and is this change the mind? It's
Yeah.
about they change the mind.
Yeah, change the mind.
So they changed their mind, but the seller told that they have sell the land to the third party.
Mm-hmm.
So now she sued for the breach of contract.
Right.
Okay, read A.
Read A. A, for the buyer, because she informed the seller with a reasonable time that she desired to close the transaction.
In terms of art here that you need to look at.
I would just underline reasonable time.
Okay.
But that's pretty much it. I don't really see any other terms of art here.
Okay, you're the master of this question. You tell me what to do. B.
B, for the buyer, because the agreement to rescind the contract was not in writing signed by the buyer and the seller. So
why you underline that?
signed it because that's a statute of frauds.
Very good. It's not in writing, statute of fraud.
Right.
Okay.
And then C, for the seller, because the contract failed to contain a stated closing date.
Okay. Will this a true statement?
No.
Is if it's failed because there's no closing? If there's no closing date, what is the date?
Usually the reasonable period of time.
Right, reasonable date.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So the closing date doesn't need to be stated in a contract.
Right.
Okay.
So C is don't look too good.
No. And then D, for the seller, because the oral rescission was valid.
Okay. So the bar examiner always put you against one and another. One of them is statute of fraud and it's not in writing.
Mhm.
The other one is statute of fraud, oral rescissions.
Mhm.
Okay, this is violent. So remember, the statute of force must be in writing to be enforceable. So for the seller, because has the oral rescission valid. So whenever you see the word oral, whenever you see the word written, all those words are important. So keep those in mind.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to go to the top and read the facts. A buyer and a seller entered into a written contract for the sale of land. So,
Perfect, right? Perfect.
so we're gonna, yeah, just like you did, circle buyer, seller, underline it, written contract, sale of land. Okay. The contract satisfied the requirements of the statute of frauds. Okay.
Okay, stop. They're not going to test you on a statute of fraud if they give you all kind of clues about statute of frauds. If they give you all kind of clues on a statute of fraud, it's not a statute of frauds topic.
Okay. Because the buyer needed time to obtain financing, the buyer and the seller did not agree upon a closing date, and the written contract did not contain a stated closing date.
What words in here that you think you have to underline? That's important.
The closing date, and then I underlined needed time to obtain financing.
Perfect. This is always a very good reason to get out of the contract. How can you buy something if the bank don't finance, right?
Yeah.
So the reason that the buyer need to, this sentence in here, because this buyer need time to obtain financing, the buyer have to have good faith and look for a bank. The buyer cannot just sit there and do nothing. Okay, I give you times to get finance, but that doesn't mean you do nothing. 10 days.
10 days after signing the contract, the buyer and the seller orally agreed to rescind the contract.
Oh, this is a rescission. When you have a buyer and a seller orally rescind the oral contract, that's the rescission. The rescission is mean both parties want to do away with the contract. Now, we know that it is written. A contract must be written to be enforceable in a statute of fraud in land.
Right.
Is this a rescission of the contract required to be in writing? The next day?
The next day, the seller sold the land to a third party.
Oh, that's after they agree. Okay. 2 days after that sale?
2 days after that sale, the original buyer told the seller that she had changed her mind and wanted to complete the contract. When the seller told her that he had sold the land to a third party, she sued him for a breach of written contract. For whom will the court find?
So they are testing us on the resistance of it. Is the resistance, it's good, right? And not only that, look what the seller did. The seller went and sell it to the third party. You see it? So can the seller go to sell a third party? I think so, unless the seller commits fraud, right? Okay, but they don't have that kind of facts in there. For whom will the court find? A.
For the buyer, because she informed the seller within a reasonable time that she desired to close the transaction.
Where does it say that?
She
Where's the buyer informed the seller within reasonable time that desired to close the transaction?
She said this after they agreed to rescind the contract.
Yeah, where did it say that? Where did it say that?
The second paragraph, 2 days after that sale. The original buyer told the seller she changed her mind. But if you look above, it says 10 days after signing the contract, the buyer and the seller orally agreed to rescind.
Yeah, I don't think this is it. I don't think this is it. I don't think within a reasonable time that the desire closed the transaction. Okay, so so that is not a good answer. That's not marinate with the fact, based on what I'm seeing. B.
B, for the buyer, because the agreement to rescind the contract was not in a writing signed by the buyer and the seller.
Wow. You remember everything must be in writing. The question is,
does the rescission have to be in writing?
Very good. C.
For the seller, because the contract failed to contain a stated closing date.
And we know that is wrong.
That's wrong.
We know that is wrong. We don't have a closing date. Closing date is not an element of a contract, right? Because it can be open and it can be reasonable, right? The price don't have to be amount if there's no price. But once there is a price, you must follow it, right? Once you have a price, you must follow it. If there is a time of the essence of closing, then you must follow it. So C, I don't like. D.
D, for the seller because the oral rescission was valid.
Oh,
So it's the opposite of B.
yes. Which one?
I would say D because an oral rescission does not have to be in writing.
Okay. Now, that is very good thinking, Reed. The general rule is we learn about a contract to buy real estate must be in writing, right? And we learn about an exception of statute of fraud. And we learn about if the buyer move in, right? A buyer move in. So that take away from a statute of fraud. If the buyer improved, right? If the buyer payment, that would take out statute of fraud. Those are the exceptions that we have learned. We have never talking about whether the resistance, okay, whether the reason must be required is to be an oral for the seller because the oral resistance was valid. If it's valid, then it will be an exception to a statute of fraud. Am I right?
Yes.
If D is correct for the seller, because the oral rescission it was valid. Oh, so that is not the exception. Right? Am I right?
No, I mean,
Wait,
that's an exception.
okay, let's attack D.
Okay.
And you circle D, you think D for the seller because the oral rescission was valid. Is that what you believe? Or is D is correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you telling me a statute of fraud does not apply to a rescission. All this time that we lecture, that we study, I never encounter a oral resistance. But it doesn't mean that the bar examiner won't test you. But for me, since I spend so much time studying, since I spend too much time of doing questions, I have never encountered an oral resistance is effective. It doesn't need to be in writing. I don't see it before, so I don't like D. I would strike D, and therefore I would circle B.
Okay.
What is the answer?
Let me check. It's D.
Wow. Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
But I want your guy on the exam. If you haven't done these kind of questions, and that's why it's important to do a lot of questions to know more exceptions. Once you are by now until September, right? By now to September, you have done thousands of questions. But if you haven't seen it, don't pick it. If you don't understand certain words, don't pick it. Okay, I would go with my logic is that I work hard. I did all the questions I could with all the time I have. I would circle D, and D say for the buyer because an agreement to reach a contract was not. Wait. No.
D is for the seller because the oral rescission was valid.
No. I misread B. What is read B for me?
B says for the buyer because the agreement to rescind the contract was not in a writing signed by the buyer and the seller.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, that's the opposite.
It's the opposite of D.
So
But it doesn't look opposite to me.
it's not opposite.
It doesn't look it to me because it's the same thing. They're both saying the rescission wasn't in writing or it was oral. That's the same thing. Not in writing and oral is the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but the winning
One is
part,
for the buyer, and the other one's for the seller.
Right. So why is it valid for one but not the other?
No, it's valid. It's valid. The agreement, rescind of contract was not in writing. Ta-da. But yeah. So but the seller win because the one sue, who would the court rule for? The court would rule for the seller, saying that oral is not valid. It must be in writing.
No,
So-
they're ruling for the seller because they're saying the oral rescission was valid, and B is saying for the buyer because it was not valid.
Mr. V, okay, I picked B too, but now looking at it in hindsight, is it because the oral rescission was valid and the seller relied on the rescission and then sold?
Oh,
I was just
okay,
about to say
maybe.
that.
I just like you guys to do something too. We learn something. We learn also when the seller already sold, the house, right? When the seller already sold the house, the court will not enforce the contract. So you cannot ask for damages for written contract. It's sue for breach of contract. Remember, there's an exception we learned. There's an
That's the
exception we
key.
learned that if the house already sold it, the court cannot fine for the buyer. And that kind of gives you a clue. Beside, we now know that a rescission for a oral is good. Only a contract must be in writing.
That's the other thing I was thinking. My leg only requires, statute of frauds only requires SOF, right? And a rescission's not part of my legs.
Mhm.
Is that bad thinking?
I love it.
That's what I was thinking.
I love it. I like it. I like it. You see it?
And
Look
the
how
buy-
difficult bar exam is. Even me practicing for 14 years, still got it wrong.
And the buyer sued for breach of contract, not for specific performance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right. I got it.
so they go toward the seller. They go to the seller. And also, but remember, they test you on is a rescission of both parties. See, here's the thing. Here's the thing. If it is a rescission orally in one side, it's different. This is a rescission. It's not a one side. It's not a one side thing. It is both sides agree to not to go forward. Am I right?
Yeah.
Both sides agree.
Yes, they both agree.
Yeah, they both agree. So that is a resistance. That is a resistance. So the
So an oral agreement to rescind a contract is enforceable even though it's not in writing.
right, but both agree. You think you see what I'm saying? There's a difference between the buyer call the seller and say, well, I'm not going to buy no more.
Well, no, that's like
Or-
refusal, right?
Or the seller call the buyer and say, well, I'm not going to sell to you. One-sided only.
Yeah.
If it's one-sided only, it's breach for contract. Look at the call to caution.
Right.
The call to caution is she sue for breach of contract. See it?
Yeah.
She sue for breach of contract. That's the call to caution. Well, what do you mean? When you sued for breach of contract, the other side do wrong. But here, both sides agree to modify. So therefore you lose also on a breach of contract. Right? A breach of contract is when you have a contract, one side don't want to do it. But here the facts say both agree. So that's another factor you need to look at. So who got this question correct? So D is the correct answer.
Well, I
Mhm.
got it right, but I don't know why at this moment.
That's terrible.
Well, yeah, well, we did this several days ago. I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, so
That's right.
to remember why I did it. Yeah, see, I marked out B and C,
Right. So
but like I said, I don't remember why.
so this is a very good question, right, guys?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
because the answer was not just in the answer, it was also in the call of the question.
Right. For breach of contract. Okay, hang on, guys.
Great.